In London, on a cold, damp morning that clung to the windows of the Talk TV studio, something was shifting. A sense of unease moved quietly among the crew as they prepped the studio, laying out coffee cups, checking the lights, adjusting the camera angles. It was supposed to be just another day, just another show, just another American politician brought in for Piers Morgan to slice apart, live, for the entertainment of millions. But what they didn't know was that Jasmine Crockett was coming not as a guest, not as a target, but as a force. A quiet storm, wrapped in a dark blue pantsuit, hair tied back, eyes steady, voice calm. She had walked through the airport alone that morning, pulling a small carry-on behind her, the weight of the mission far heavier than the bag she rolled across the cold floors of Heathrow. Inside that bag was a folder. Inside that folder was the truth. It had been building for months, this moment. Piers Morgan had made her a frequent target on his show, questioning her intelligence, her credibility, her qualifications. Day after day, segment after segment, he had used her name for clicks, twisting her speeches into cheap sound bites, mocking her with that smirk that had become his brand. He had called her a TikTok politician, a grandstander, a child pretending to play in the halls of Congress. But it was more than the words. It was the intent behind them. The smirk, the wave of the hand, the complete disregard for what those lies cost her, the threats she received, the endless messages telling her to go back to where she came from, the emails calling her unworthy, incompetent, a fraud. Jasmine knew the game. She had seen it before, as a civil rights attorney in Texas, as a black woman in politics, as someone who had to work twice as hard for half the respect in rooms filled with people who underestimated her before she even opened her mouth. She knew how men like Piers operated, but what he didn't know was that Jasmine had been quietly preparing, documenting, collecting, waiting for the perfect moment when the lights would be bright enough, the audience large enough, the stakes high enough. And today was that day. The crew didn't notice at first. They were too busy setting up, checking sound levels, adjusting lighting rigs. Jasmine sat calmly in the guest chair, looking around the studio, memorizing the exit, the positions of the cameras, the faces of the crew. She wasn't nervous. She had done this before in different rooms, different fights, different courts. But today, the courtroom was Piers Morgan's stage, and she was about to turn it into a place where the truth would finally be heard. Piers arrived late, as he often did, with a coffee in one hand and a phone in the other, barking instructions into the device, telling a producer to get the latest clip of Jasmine's meltdown, ready to roll. He barely glanced at her as he walked past, giving her a quick nod, the smirk already on his face, the confidence rolling off him like a cologne he wore too heavily. He didn't see the folder on the table in front of her. He didn't notice the quiet way she sat, her back straight, her breathing even, her eyes following him as he moved around the set. They went live. The opening was typical Piers Morgan, fast, sharp, meant to dominate, to control the conversation before it even began. Congresswoman Crockett, welcome to the show. Let's not waste time. Your recent performances in Congress have been described by many as childish, performative, and frankly embarrassing. Do you really think shouting at people in hearings makes you an effective leader? He leaned back, folding his arms, smirk in place, waiting for the defensive stumble, the emotional reaction, the clip he could replay over and over. But Jasmine didn't stumble. She didn't react. She didn't even blink. Instead, she leaned forward slightly, placing her hands on the table, her voice calm, measured, clear. Piers, I'm glad you brought that up because today we're going to talk about performances. Not mine, but yours. The smirk wavered, just for a moment, a flicker across his face, but he recovered quickly. Oh, really? Is this going to be one of those moments where you try to dodge accountability by attacking the media? Jasmine smiled, a small, controlled smile that didn't reach her eyes. No, Piers, this is going to be one of those moments where the media is held accountable. She reached down, lifted the folder, and placed it on the table between them. The camera zoomed in slightly, catching the gold seal of the United States Department of Justice, the weight of the document clear in the way it landed on the table. Piers glanced at it, then back at her, confusion starting to creep in around the edges. "What is this?" he asked, trying to keep the authority in his voice, but it cracked just a little. "This," Jasmine said, opening the folder, "is evidence. Evidence that for the past 6 months, you and your show have knowingly spread false information about me. Evidence that you have received documentation proving the falsity of your claims and chose to ignore it. Evidence that you have defamed a sitting member of Congress for clicks, for ratings, for your own personal gain." The silence in the studio was heavy. The crew behind the glass stopped moving. The producers exchanged glances, unsure if they should cut to commercial, but unable to look away. Piers tried to laugh. "Oh, come on. This is ridiculous. You're not seriously—" But Jasmine wasn't laughing. She pulled out the first document, holding it up for the camera. "On October 12th, your producer emailed my office requesting confirmation of my law degree and bar admission. We provided transcripts, bar admission records, and direct confirmation from the University of Houston. Despite receiving this, you went on air on October 15th and told your audience that my credentials were in question." She placed the document on the table, sliding it toward him. Piers's mouth opened, then closed. No words came out. She pulled out another document. "On October 20th, your team contacted my office regarding rumors of an ethics investigation. We provided statements from the House Ethics Committee confirming there was no investigation, no complaint, nothing. 2 days later, on October 22nd, you told your viewers I was under investigation." Another document slid across the table. She continued, each document a blow, each date a reminder, each fact an unbreakable chain that linked his words to his intent. Piers tried to interrupt, to reclaim the space, but Jasmine didn't let him. "Piers, this isn't about your opinions. This is about facts. You claimed I was hiding financial conflicts of interest, but my disclosures are public record. You claimed I was under investigation, but there was no investigation. You claimed my law degree was fraudulent, but you had the documentation proving it was real. This is not free speech. This is defamation." And then, the moment that would be replayed across the world, the clip that would be viewed millions of times within hours. Jasmine reached into the folder and pulled out the final piece, a USB drive. She placed it on the table, looking him in the eyes. "This," she said, "is a recording. A recording of your producer admitting that you knew the stories you were airing were false, but that you aired them anyway because, and I quote, 'it makes for good TV.'" Piers's face drained of color. The smirk was gone. The crew behind the glass froze, their eyes wide, hands over mouths, as they realized they were witnessing the collapse of the man who had built his empire on intimidation and spectacle. Jasmine leaned back, letting the silence do the work. And in that silence, you could almost hear the shifting of power, the turning of the tide, the moment when Piers Morgan's control over the Nara Piers Morgan didn't know how to sit still. That was the first thing the crew noticed as the silence stretched across the studio, hanging thick like London fog. His knee bounced under the table. His fingers tapped against the edge of his coffee cup. His eyes darted to the producers behind the glass, looking for someone, anyone, to save him. But no one moved. Because Jasmine Crockett wasn't moving either. She sat there, eyes fixed on him, her posture calm, her breathing steady, the USB drive sitting on the table between them like a loaded weapon. Outside the studio, the world was watching. Streams across YouTube, Facebook, and X were live, and the chat sections were exploding. People from New York to Nairobi were glued to their screens. Not because they were waiting for Piers Morgan to humiliate another guest, but because they were watching him fall apart in real time. Jasmine leaned forward, her voice quiet but clear. "Piers, I'm going to play this recording. I want your viewers to hear the truth, unedited, uncut." Piers tried to interject, his voice cracking just slightly. "Now, hang on, this isn't how it works." But Jasmine didn't look away. She didn't flinch. "This is how it works when the lies end, Piers." She plugged the USB into the small audio console the crew had set up for guest clips. The technician behind the glass looked like he was about to protest, but the producer shook his head, letting it happen. They all knew it was too late to stop what was coming. The audio came alive in the studio, loud enough for the microphones to pick it up, clear enough that there was no mistaking the voices. It was Piers's senior producer, a man whose voice was familiar to anyone who watched behind-the-scenes clips of Piers Morgan Uncensored. You could hear the clinking of glasses, the low hum of a bar in the background. Look, Piers doesn't care if it's all true. He knows it's bullshit. But it gets engagement, and that's what we need right now, especially with the advertisers getting nervous. The voice laughed, a sharp, uncomfortable sound. He's not going to apologize to that Congresswoman. Hell, we're hoping she gets mad on air. That's what sells. The laughter stopped, and the voice lowered, almost conspiratorial. We have the documents she sent us, yeah, the bar admission stuff. We have the ethics committee statements. We just don't run it. It's boring, mate. The clip ended, and for a moment, the studio was silent, except for the low buzz of the lights and the quiet breathing of the crew, who stood frozen, headphones around their necks, cameras rolling, capturing every detail. Piers opened his mouth, but no words came out. His eyes were wide, his lips parted, the flush of embarrassment crawling up his neck. Jasmine reached into her folder again, pulling out the transcript of the recording. You see, Piers, this is what defamation looks like. It's not a mistake. It's not a misunderstanding. It's a deliberate choice to spread lies for profit. She placed the transcript on the table, sliding it toward him. You and your team made a decision to ignore the truth. You chose to destroy my reputation to entertain your audience. You chose to put my safety at risk, to invite threats, to encourage harassment, all for ratings. Piers finally found his voice, but it was smaller than usual, lacking the booming confidence that made him famous. This is out of context. It's edited. You can't. Jasmine shook her head, cutting him off with nothing more than a look. The full recording is with the Department of Justice. They have everything. This is not just a defamation case anymore, Piers. This is obstruction. This is reckless endangerment. This is fraud. The word fraud seemed to hang in the air, echoing off the walls of the studio. Piers's eyes flicked to the camera, and for the first time in his career, he seemed to realize that the camera wasn't his ally anymore. It wasn't there to amplify his voice or frame him as the hero of his own story. It was there to document the truth. Outside the studio, the clip was already spreading. Editors clipped the moment Jasmine plugged in the USB. The precise second Piers' face changed and shared it across every platform. TikTok, X, Instagram, and YouTube Shorts were flooded with millions of views within minutes. Hashtags like #PiersExposed, #JasmineWins, and #LiveAccountability began trending globally. News networks were scrambling. CNN cut into a scheduled segment to go live with commentary. Anderson Cooper's voice came over the screen saying, "We are witnessing something unprecedented in live television right now." BBC broke into their regular programming to cover the confrontation, with anchors visibly stunned as they replayed the clip. Inside the studio, Jasmine continued, her voice calm, unwavering. "I want you to understand what you've done, Piers. Every lie you told, every false claim you made, every moment you mocked me for the sake of your ratings, it all has consequences." She reached into her folder one last time, pulling out a final document. "This is the official filing for a defamation and fraud lawsuit, Piers. It's not just against you. It's against your network, your producers, and everyone who allowed these lies to spread despite having the evidence in your hands." She placed it in front of him, and for a moment, Piers didn't move. His hand hovered over the document, trembling slightly before he finally grasped it, his eyes scanning the words, the seal, the signatures. The camera captured every second of it. Jasmine leaned back in her chair, folding her hands, her eyes on him. "You've been served, Piers." It wasn't loud, it wasn't shouted, but it was final. And in that moment, something shifted. Piers looked up at her, and for the first time, the smirk was gone. The false confidence was gone. The shield of arrogance that he had used for decades to dominate interviews, to shut down arguments, to control narratives, was gone. He was just a man, sitting under harsh studio lights, facing the reality of his own actions. The crew didn't move. The producers didn't speak. The silence was heavy, but it was honest. Piers swallowed hard, his voice barely above a whisper. "You've planned this." Jasmine nodded. Yes, I did, because accountability requires preparation. She stood, collecting her folder, the USB drive, the copies of the documents she had laid out on the table. Piers looked up at her, the document still in his hand, his mouth opening as if to speak, but no words came. Jasmine paused, looking down at him, her expression softening just slightly. I don't hate you, Piers, but I won't let you lie about me anymore, or about anyone else. She turned and walked off the set, her steps measured, her posture steady, leaving Piers sitting alone, the camera still rolling, capturing the moment the king of confrontation was left speechless by the truth. The feed stayed live for another 15 seconds, capturing Piers as he looked around, searching for someone to take him off the air, to save him from the reality that the world had just witnessed. Finally, he managed to find his voice, turning to the camera. We'll be right back. The screen cut to black, but it was too late. The damage was done. Outside the studio, the world was on fire. The clip of Jasmine saying, "You've been served, Piers," was already the most shared video on social media that day. News anchors replayed it on loop. Legal analysts debated the implications. Media watchdogs called it a defining moment for accountability in journalism. Piers's team scrambled to prepare a statement, trying to spin it as a political stunt. But the evidence was everywhere, undeniable and clear. Jasmine had come prepared, and the world saw it. And for Jasmine Crockett, it wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about humiliation. It was about setting a precedent, drawing a line, showing that even in an age of viral clips and soundbite journalism, facts still mattered and the truth could still cut through the noise. It was about proving that accountability wasn't dead, that integrity wasn't optional, that the truth could still win. Jasmine Crockett stepped out of the studio doors into the cold London air, the weight of the moment finally sinking in as the glass doors closed behind her. The rush of adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation began to fade, replaced by a calm, steady focus that had driven her since she decided to take this fight public. Behind her, the crew inside Talk TV stood frozen, the hush of the studio holding them in place, the glow of the stage lights suddenly feeling harsh, revealing uncomfortably bright. Piers Morgan remained seated in his chair, the document still in his hand, the cameras off now, but the damage irreversible. Outside on the sidewalk, Jasmine paused, breathing in the cold air, her eyes scanning the early morning traffic as the city moved, unaware of the storm that had just broken inside that studio. But it wouldn't stay hidden for long. Inside, Piers's producers scrambled, pulling out phones, whispering urgently to one another. Calls were made to legal teams, to the network executives, to PR firms who were already drafting statements they hoped would contain the fallout. But the world was already watching. It started with a single clip, a 20-second video of Jasmine leaning forward, placing the DOJ sealed document on the table and saying, "You've been served, Piers." The clip hit X, posted by a junior producer who didn't think twice, who just wanted to get ahead of the wave, to claim the viral moment before anyone else. Within minutes, it was everywhere. On TikTok, creators stitched the clip, adding captions like, "This is how you do it," and "Accountability Live." On Instagram, Reels played the audio on loop with reactions of people watching Piers's face change from confident to pale. On Reddit, threads exploded with titles like "Piers Morgan finally gets humbled live" and "Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett just ended Piers Morgan's career." CNN cut into a scheduled segment to cover the confrontation, with anchors visibly stunned, shaking their heads as they replayed the audio of Piers's own producer, admitting that they knowingly aired false claims for ratings. Anderson Cooper's voice was calm, but edged with something like awe, as he told viewers, "This is unprecedented. We are witnessing a sitting member of Congress using live television as a courtroom to hold a media personality accountable." BBC followed, running the clip on their evening broadcast, their legal analyst explaining the defamation laws that could apply, noting the potential international complications of a U.S. Congresswoman filing a lawsuit against a UK-based media figure for false claims broadcast to a global audience. Fox News tried to spin it, with one host claiming it was an attack on free speech, but even they replayed the clip, unable to resist the pull of the moment. Sponsors began calling Piers' network within hours. Some wanted explanations, others wanted assurances. A few quietly pulled their ads from the next week's programming, citing risk management. The network's legal team issued frantic memos, warning staff to say nothing publicly, to direct all questions to PR, to avoid social media. But it was too late. The clip was viral in a way that no manufactured outrage could match, because it was real, undeniable, and raw. Meanwhile, Jasmine sat quietly in the back of a black cab, her phone buzzing non-stop. Messages from colleagues, friends, and strangers poured in, most of them saying the same thing. Thank you. She didn't smile. Not yet. It wasn't over. It was never just about the moment. It was about the change that needed to follow. As the cab moved through London, Jasmine stared out the window, watching the city blur past, her reflection in the glass steady, determined. In Washington, her staff back at the congressional office were fielding calls from reporters, advocacy groups, and other politicians. Her chief of staff, a calm and sharp former journalist, coordinated the statements, making sure the message was clear. This isn't about silencing criticism. It's about stopping lies. It's about accountability. They posted a single statement to Jasmine's social media. Facts matter. Accountability matters. No one is above the truth. And that was it. No victory lap, no celebratory post, just the truth. Meanwhile, inside Talk TV, Piers Morgan finally stood up from his chair, clutching the document Jasmine had left behind, his face pale, the confidence that defined his brand nowhere to be seen. He tried to rally, calling his producer over, demanding options, asking if they could cut the segment, claiming it was a setup, a trap. But the producer could only shake his head. It was live, Piers. It's already out there. Piers rubbed his face, trying to process the reality that for the first time, he wasn't in control of the narrative. Across the internet, memes bloomed like wildflowers. A split-screen image of Piers's confident pre-show smirk next to the shocked, pale look on his face after Jasmine's reveal was shared millions of times with captions like "before versus after truth" and "when the receipts drop." Legal experts on YouTube began posting breakdown videos within hours, explaining defamation law, the standards for public figures, the potential for punitive damages when actual malice could be proven. One lawyer, a popular creator, said it clearly. If what Jasmine presented is accurate, Piers Morgan is in serious trouble. This could cost him tens of millions, and more importantly, his credibility. Other members of Congress took note. Jasmine received private messages from colleagues, some praising her courage, others asking for advice on dealing with media attacks. A few hinted that they, too, were documenting the false claims made about them, preparing for their own moments of accountability. Meanwhile, Jasmine's team began organizing the evidence, preparing the formal filings, ensuring that every document, every email, every transcript was properly cataloged and ready for the legal fight that was coming. Because Jasmine knew this was just the beginning. She knew that Piers and his network would fight back, would try to spin the narrative, would try to paint her as a bully, as a politician trying to silence the press. But she also knew she had the truth on her side, and she was prepared for the battle ahead. As the sun set over London, casting long shadows over the city, Jasmine Crockett sat in her hotel room, reviewing the files one more time, her mind calm, her resolve firm. This wasn't about her anymore. This was about setting a precedent. This was about sending a message that the truth still mattered, that lies had consequences, and that no one, not even Piers Morgan, was above accountability. The phone rang. It was her chief of staff, updating her on the day's developments, the media responses, the public support, the legal strategy. Jasmine listened, nodding, making notes, her mind already moving to the next steps. When the call ended, she stood, walking to the window, looking out over the London skyline, the lights of the city twinkling in the night. She allowed herself a moment to breathe, to feel the weight of what had happened. Then she turned away from the window, ready for what came next. Because Jasmine Crockett wasn't done. Piers Morgan sat alone in his office, the document Jasmine Crockett had left on the table now resting heavily in his lap. Outside, the chaos of a collapsing narrative rippled through the hallways of Talk TV, producers rushing back and forth, the buzz of frantic phone calls and panicked voices leaking through the thin walls. For a man who made his living by controlling the story, Piers had never felt so powerless. His phone lit up with a call from the network's legal team, the name flashing across the screen like a warning he wasn't ready to face. He let it ring, staring at the city lights outside, trying to find the confidence that used to come so easily. But the smirk wasn't coming back. Meanwhile, the world was moving on without him, and it was moving fast. CNN's evening panel lit up with discussions, clips of Jasmine placing the DOJ sealed folder on the table playing in a loop as analysts debated the fallout. Anderson Cooper, his face a mix of curiosity and concern, led the conversation with measured words. This isn't just a lawsuit. This is a moment that could redefine how media interacts with public figures in the digital age. MSNBC's Rachel Maddow called it one of the most precise and fearless moments of accountability we've seen in recent memory, dissecting the potential legal implications with the same quiet intensity Jasmine had shown. BBC aired a special report showing Jasmine's calm delivery, the trembling in Piers's hands as he held the document, the silence that followed. Legal experts explained defamation law, the hurdles of proving actual malice, and how Jasmine's evidence might be enough to clear those hurdles. Even Fox News, where Piers had allies, struggled to defend him. A few hosts tried, calling Jasmine's actions grandstanding, but the clips told a different story, and viewers could see it for themselves. On TikTok, creators stitched Jasmine's words, "You've been served, Piers," with reactions of people clapping, cheering, or simply staring in stunned silence. The hashtag had Piers served crossed 50 million views within 24 hours, while hashtag Crockett Effect began trending, symbolizing a shift in how audiences viewed the accountability of media figures. Sponsors felt the tremor too. Phone calls poured into Talk TV from advertisers demanding explanations, with some pulling ads indefinitely until the situation was resolved. A major sponsor for Piers' show released a statement. "We believe in freedom of speech, but we also believe in truth. We will pause our partnership pending the resolution of these serious allegations." Piers's producer, the same one whose voice was captured on Jasmine's recording, found himself placed on administrative leave within hours, pending internal review. He cleared his desk, avoiding eye contact with colleagues, the reality of his casual remarks now a potential legal liability for the entire network. Inside Talk TV, crisis meetings stretched late into the night. Executives debated strategies, issue a public apology, fight back aggressively, or quietly settle and hope it would go away. Lawyers argued over jurisdiction, weighing the complications of a U.S. Congresswoman suing a UK broadcaster with a global audience. But the decision wasn't Piers's to make anymore. For Jasmine Crockett, the days that followed were a whirlwind of quiet triumph and relentless focus. Back in Washington, she returned to her congressional duties, walking the halls with the same calm determination that had carried her through the confrontation. Colleagues stopped her in the hall to shake her hand, whispering words of support, telling her they were proud, that they had watched it live, that it had given them hope. In committee meetings, she was sharper than ever, her questions direct, her demeanor unshakable. The staffers who supported her worked longer hours, fielding requests from journalists, legal analysts, and advocacy groups who wanted to understand what had happened and what came next. Late at night, Jasmine sat in her office, reviewing the legal filings her team was preparing, ensuring every detail was correct. She knew Piers would fight back, that he would try to reclaim the narrative, that he would frame himself as the victim, spinning it into an attack on free speech. But she also knew the truth, and the truth was on her side. Meanwhile, the world continued to talk. Late-night comedians dedicated entire segments to the confrontation. Stephen Colbert played the clip, pausing to mimic Piers' shocked expression, joking, "You can actually see the moment his soul leaves his body." The audience roared with laughter, but beneath the humor, there was a sense of something deeper, a moment of cultural reckoning. Trevor Noah, on his streaming show, took a different angle, explaining defamation law in simple terms, helping viewers understand why Jasmine's actions weren't about silencing criticism, but about protecting herself from lies. "Facts matter," he said, looking into the camera. "And if you're going to say something about someone, especially someone in public service, you'd better have your receipts." Meanwhile, social media was relentless. Twitter was filled with clips, commentary, memes, and debates. Some argued it was about time media figures faced consequences for spreading misinformation. Others questioned whether this would create a chilling effect on journalism, but most saw it for what it was, a moment when truth finally stood up to power in a space where power was usually unchallenged. Piers, unable to remain silent forever, finally released a statement. It was a carefully worded, lawyer-approved message, calling Jasmine's actions an attempt to intimidate journalists, while asserting his commitment to robust debate and fearless inquiry. But the statement fell flat. Underneath his post, comments flooded in, reminding him of the evidence Jasmine had laid out, the receipts she had presented, the recording of his producer admitting they knew the stories were false. The damage was done. Jasmine, for her part, remained silent on social media, allowing the moment to speak for itself. She continued her work, preparing for committee hearings, drafting legislation, meeting with constituents. The confrontation with Piers Morgan was just one part of her mission, not the entirety of it. In the legal world, the case became a subject of intense discussion. Law schools began analyzing the strategy Jasmine employed, noting the precision with which she documented every false claim, the preparation she undertook to ensure her case was airtight. The Crockett effect, as some began calling it, wasn't just about one confrontation. It was about a new approach to accountability in the media landscape. Public figures, often the targets of misinformation, were watching closely, learning that there were ways to fight back effectively without compromising their integrity. For young activists and aspiring politicians, Jasmine became a symbol of strength and strategy, proof that preparation, patience, and courage could break through even the loudest noise. Inside Talk TV, the fallout continued. Piers' ratings took a hit, sponsors remained cautious, and the network found itself under increased scrutiny from regulators and the public. Internally, staff morale dropped as uncertainty loomed over the future of the show, and Piers, once the unchallenged master of the on-air confrontation, found himself facing a reality he had never imagined. He was no longer untouchable. In private, he raged, blaming producers, lawyers, even Jasmine herself. But deep down, he knew it was his own choices that led him here. As Jasmine prepared for the next steps in her legal action, she reflected on the moment, understanding its significance, but also recognizing the work that still lay ahead. Because for Jasmine Crockett, accountability wasn't a single event. It was a commitment, a promise to herself, to her constituents, and to the truth, a promise she intended to keep. When Jasmine Crockett returned to Washington, the weight of what she had set in motion followed her through every hallway, every committee room, every late-night policy meeting. She walked with a calm confidence, her steps measured, her posture steady, but even her staff could feel it. The eyes of the nation and the world were on her now, not because she had gone viral, but because she had done something many believed was impossible. She had challenged a powerful media figure, lived with receipts, and won the moment. But moments pass. Jasmine knew that what came next mattered even more. The lawsuit was officially filed in the United States District Court for the Southern District of New York, leveraging jurisdiction based on the network's business operations and the international reach of Piers Morgan's broadcasts. The filing was precise, thorough, and detailed, listing each false claim Piers and his show had aired, each date, each time Jasmine's team had provided the correct information that was ignored. The legal community took notice immediately. Articles appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, and The Guardian, dissecting the case's potential to reshape media accountability in the digital age. Law professors discussed it with their students, analyzing Jasmine's strategy, the burden of proof in defamation cases involving public figures, and the rare but powerful claim of actual malice that Jasmine's evidence was prepared to demonstrate. And Piers Morgan, for the first time in his career, found himself in a defensive position he couldn't talk his way out of. Inside Talk TV, emergency meetings continued. Lawyers debated strategies while PR teams prepared statements that danced around the truth, trying to preserve the network's image while acknowledging the severity of the claims. Some advised Piers to issue a public apology and attempt settlement quietly, but Piers resisted. "It will make me look weak," he said in a closed-door meeting, his voice sharp, his hands clenched on the conference table. "It will make you look prepared," one lawyer countered gently, but Piers wouldn't listen. He still believed he could control the story, but outside those walls, the world was moving, and it wasn't waiting for Piers to catch up. On social media, the Crockett effect continued to grow. Hashtags like #TruthMatters and #CrockettWins were attached to clips of Jasmine's confrontation, while creators broke down legal concepts in short, engaging videos that spread faster than any press release could match. Jasmine, meanwhile, stayed quiet. She focused on her work, on the legislation she was preparing, on the cases her office was assisting with, on the constituents who needed her attention. She knew the lawsuit was significant, but it was not all she was. She was not defined by the confrontation, even if the media wanted her to be. At night, when the day's work was done, Jasmine met with her legal team in private calls, reviewing the strategy, preparing for depositions, planning for discovery. She knew Piers would fight, and she was ready. Because Jasmine Crockett didn't come to fight a media war. She came to prove a point: that facts mattered, that lies had consequences, that power, even in media, was not above accountability. And Piers, in his attempts to regain control, made mistakes. He went on air, trying to spin the narrative, claiming that Jasmine was attacking free speech, that she was afraid of tough questions. He framed himself as the victim, the journalist under fire for doing his job. But the audience wasn't buying it. Clips of Piers trying to frame himself as the victim were immediately stitched with Jasmine's quiet, confident words from the confrontation. People could see the difference, and the internet, ruthless in its clarity, made sure the comparison was everywhere. Meanwhile, journalists around the world debated the case, discussing the responsibility of media figures, the balance between free speech and factual reporting, the ethical boundaries that had long been blurred in the pursuit of clicks and ratings. In New York, Jasmine's legal team moved forward with discovery requests, demanding internal communications from Piers's team and Talk TV regarding the stories aired about her. The requests were specific, targeted, and deeply uncomfortable for the network's legal counsel, who realized the implications. If the communications proved that Piers and his producers knew the stories were false and aired them anyway, it would not just be a defamation case. It would become a landmark case in media law, setting a precedent that could ripple through the entire industry. Sponsors, already wary, began pulling out, not just from Piers's show, but from other programs on the network, citing concerns about credibility and reputational risk. The financial pressure mounted, and inside Talk TV, executives were forced to consider a future without their most famous, and now most controversial, host. Meanwhile, Jasmine continued her work quietly, declining most interview requests, focusing instead on serving her district and preparing for the legal battle ahead. The silence was strategic. It allowed the facts to speak for themselves. It allowed the evidence to breathe. It allowed the world to see the contrast between the loud, blustering defense of a media figure desperate to maintain control and the quiet, determined pursuit of truth by a public servant with nothing to hide. And the world was watching. Law schools began adding the case to their media law curriculum, using it as an example of how public figures could respond to misinformation strategically, effectively, and legally. Journalists discussed the implications in panels, analyzing how the fear of lawsuits could encourage more rigorous fact-checking and responsible reporting. But for Jasmine, it was never about fear. It was about integrity. It was about restoring faith in a system that many believed was too broken to fix. And as the case moved forward, Piers Morgan faced a reality he could not spin. The evidence was real, the damage was done, and the consequences were coming. In the weeks that followed, depositions were scheduled. Piers was ordered to testify under oath, to answer questions about the decisions made in his newsroom, about the emails his team received from Jasmine's office, about the recording of his producer admitting they knowingly ignored the truth. For the first time, Piers's voice, so often the loudest in the room, would be under the control of others, forced to answer, not talk over. And Jasmine? She prepared. Every question, every document, every fact was reviewed, cross-checked, and prepared for the depositions, ensuring that when Piers tried to deflect, the truth would stand in his way. Meanwhile, the public continued to watch, not out of a desire for drama, but because they saw something rare, a commitment to truth that did not waver under pressure. And for many, it was a reminder that even in a world dominated by noise, substance could still win. One evening, as Jasmine left her office late, walking through the quiet halls of Congress, she paused at a window, looking out over the city lights. She allowed herself a moment to breathe, to reflect on the journey that had brought her here, the threats, the lies, the relentless noise, and now, the silence that followed the truth. She didn't smile, but her eyes softened as she turned away, walking back toward her work, ready for the next day, for the next challenge. Because Jasmine Crockett understood something Piers Morgan was only now beginning to learn. That the truth, when spoken clearly, when backed by evidence, when pursued with integrity, is more powerful than any viral moment, any manufactured outrage, any loud, empty shout. And that accountability is not the enemy of free speech. It is its foundation. The day Piers Morgan was scheduled for his sworn deposition arrived with a quiet tension that even he could not spin away. Outside the legal offices in Manhattan, a line of camera crews stood ready, their lenses aimed at the black SUV that pulled up to the curb. Piers stepped out, wearing a dark suit, the crisp morning air doing nothing to ease the weight pressing down on him. He paused, adjusted his tie, and for a moment tried to summon the smirk that had carried him through decades of confrontation. But it didn't come. Reporters shouted questions, asking if he was nervous, if he planned to apologize, if he thought his career was over. Piers kept his eyes forward, saying nothing as he walked into the building, the doors closing behind him, sealing him inside with the reality he had tried to avoid. Inside the conference room, the mood was heavy. Jasmine's legal team was prepared, folders stacked neatly, every document cross-referenced, every claim backed with evidence. Piers's legal counsel sat beside him, whispering last-minute instructions, but they both knew that once the deposition began, there would be no interruptions, no studio cuts to commercial, no clever edits to save him. For Piers, there would only be the questions, and the truth. Across the ocean, Jasmine Crockett was in her Washington office, the morning sun streaming through the windows as she prepared for a day of committee meetings. Her phone buzzed occasionally with updates from her legal team, but she stayed focused, her work continuing, her purpose unchanged. She didn't need to be in that room to know what was happening. She trusted the process, the evidence, the truth she had carried with her into that studio in London, the truth that had become the center of a legal reckoning the world was watching. Inside the deposition room, Piers shifted uncomfortably as the first questions began. Mr. Morgan, on October 15th, during your broadcast, you stated that Congresswoman Crockett's legal credentials were under investigation. Prior to this broadcast, were you or your team in possession of documentation confirming her credentials? Piers hesitated, his mouth opening then closing before his lawyer leaned in, whispering something. Piers cleared his throat. Yes. The room was silent as the lawyer for Jasmine's team nodded, flipping to the next document. And on October 22nd, you aired a segment claiming that Congresswoman Crockett was under investigation by the House Ethics Committee. Prior to airing this segment, did your team receive a statement from the committee indicating no such investigation existed? Piers swallowed. Yes. Each answer was a nail in the coffin of his carefully crafted narrative, each acknowledgement a step further from the persona he had built for himself on screen. The questioning continued for hours, methodical, precise, stripping away the bluster, leaving only the facts. And the facts were clear. Piers had known the truth. He had chosen to ignore it. Outside, the world watched as updates trickled out. Legal analysts explaining the significance of Piers' admissions. Journalists discussing the potential fallout. Sponsors making quiet decisions about where to place their support moving forward. Inside Talk TV, The ripple effects were immediate. Meetings were held, discussions about the future of Piers' show dominating conversations in boardrooms. Some argued that the brand was too damaged, that the sponsors were too wary, that the viewers had lost trust. Others tried to salvage what they could, proposing changes, rebranding efforts, even discussing possible replacements should the legal consequences become too severe. Meanwhile, Jasmine remained focused. She continued to meet with constituents, to draft legislation, to question witnesses in hearings with the same precision she had shown in that studio. Her staff worked tirelessly, balancing the legal battle with the daily work of serving their district. The public response was overwhelming. Letters poured into Jasmine's office, emails from people across the country thanking her for standing up, for reminding them that accountability was still possible. Parents wrote about watching the confrontation with their children, using it as a lesson in integrity and courage. Young women, especially young Black women, sent messages saying they saw themselves in Jasmine, that her calm, deliberate strength gave them hope, that her refusal to back down reminded them of their own worth. And Jasmine read every letter, every message, letting them fuel her, reminding her why she had chosen this path. Because it was never about personal victory, it was about the truth. It was about proving that power, even the power of a media giant, could be challenged when it was used irresponsibly, when it became a weapon of misinformation and harm. As the weeks passed, the legal process moved forward. Settlement discussions began quietly, Piers' team understanding the weight of the evidence, the potential costs of a drawn-out trial, the public relations disaster that would follow if every detail became part of the public record. Talk TV, facing financial pressure, shrinking ad revenue, and a growing loss of viewer trust, began restructuring. Internal memos circulated, discussing new standards for fact-checking and increased editorial oversight, phrases that tried to mask the truth. They had been caught, and they needed to change. For Jasmine, the outcome was clear. Whether the settlement came or the case went to trial, the point had been made. The world had seen what accountability looked like. The viewers, the voters, the people who relied on truthful reporting had seen that it was possible to demand better, to expect integrity, to require honesty. And in the end, that was what mattered. One evening, as Jasmine walked home from her office, the cool air brushing against her skin, she paused on the steps of the Capitol, looking out over the city, the lights twinkling in the darkness. She allowed herself a moment to breathe, to reflect on the journey, from the threats and the lies, to the confrontation in London, to the quiet, relentless work of pursuing justice. She thought about the young women watching, the constituents who believed in her, the people who had reached out, saying, "Thank you for fighting." She didn't smile, but her eyes softened, a quiet strength radiating from her as she turned and continued walking. Because Jasmine Crockett understood something that had guided her through every moment of this battle, that the truth is not loud. It does not need to shout. It does not need to perform. The truth simply is. And in a world full of noise, when someone is willing to stand for the truth, to fight for it, to protect it, the truth will always, eventually, rise above the noise. Even when the noise is loud, even when the odds seem impossible, even when the world has forgotten how to listen. Because the truth, spoken with courage, backed by evidence, carried by integrity, will always find its way through. And that, more than any viral clip or trending hashtag, is what Jasmine Crockett gave the world. A reminder that accountability is possible, that integrity is powerful, that the truth, in the end, always matters.